The chamber was enormous, carved from a single crystal that grew naturally on Axiom Prime. Light passed through the walls in strange ways, creating rainbows that danced across the faces of 47 different alien species. Each species had sent their best diplomats, their wisest leaders, their most respected voices. They sat in a great circle, and at the center of that circle stood a single human woman. Ambassador Sarah Chen wore a simple gray suit. Her black hair was tied back neatly. She stood straight and tall, even though every eye in the chamber looked at her with something between fear and disgust. She had been standing there for 6 hours now, listening to species after species explain why humanity needed to be removed from the Galactic Council. The Vrelian ambassador spoke with 3 mouths at once, creating a harmony of accusation. Humanity has colonized 200 worlds in only 300 years. The Vrelians took 2,000 years to colonize 50 worlds. This speed is unnatural. It is dangerous. Sarah wanted to point out that humans simply worked faster, planned better, and didn't spend centuries debating every decision. But she stayed quiet. She had learned that the council didn't appreciate her honesty. The Krell representative, an ancient creature that looked like a floating brain inside a protective bubble, pulsed with blue light as it spoke telepathically. All the translator devices in the room turned its thoughts into words. Humanity's military is the problem. They do not follow the standard doctrine of civilized warfare. They use tricks. They use deception. They attack from unexpected angles. This chaos cannot be tolerated in an orderly galaxy. Sarah almost smiled at that. Yes, humans didn't line up their ships in neat rows and fire at each other until one side gave up. Humans studied their enemies, found weaknesses, and exploited them. That was called winning. A small, furry creature named Ambassador Tillich stood on his seat to be seen. His species, the Xanthari, were traders and merchants. The economic disruption caused by humanity is severe. They negotiate too aggressively. They find new trade routes we never considered. They create products that make our traditional goods obsolete. The market cannot handle such rapid change. The complaints continued for another hour. Humans were too loud. Humans asked too many questions. Humans didn't respect the way things had always been done. Humans insisted on keeping their old Earth concepts of individual freedom and personal rights, even though the Council had tried to explain that collective harmony was more important. Finally, Council Leader Vexthor raised his forearms for silence. He was a Thexian, tall and proud with scales that shimmered like oil on water. His species had been part of the Council for 12,000 years. He looked down at Sarah with his 6 eyes, and she saw something there that wasn't quite hatred. It was fear. Ambassador Chen, he said, his voice deep and rumbling. Humanity has been part of this council for only 73 years. In that time, you have caused more disruption than any species in recorded history. You expand too quickly. You innovate too rapidly. You refuse to accept the wisdom of civilizations far older than your own. Sarah finally spoke. We came here seeking friendship. We came here hoping to learn from the galaxy's great civilizations. We have followed every law. We have honored every treaty. Our only crime is being different. Different is dangerous, Vexthor said flatly. The Council has existed for 50,000 years because we value stability. We value predictability. Humanity brings chaos everywhere you go. Even your own planet has hundreds of different nations, cultures, and languages. You cannot even unify yourselves, yet you presume to have a voice in galactic affairs. Our diversity makes us strong, Sarah replied. Different perspectives solve problems in new ways. Your diversity makes you unstable, Vexthor countered. We have studied your history. Thousands of wars, millions dead, cycles of violence and peace over and over. You are a young species, Ambassador Chen. You are still learning to control your aggressive instincts. The Arxelian delegate, a crystalline being that communicated through musical tones, added its voice. We do not hate humanity. We fear for you. You rush forward without wisdom. You need time to mature to grow beyond your violent nature. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when you have learned peace, you will be ready to rejoin civilized society. Sarah looked around the chamber. She saw the faces of species she had worked with, negotiated with, even laughed with at diplomatic functions. Some looked away. Some met her eyes with what might have been regret. But none spoke in humanity's defense. I request a vote be delayed, Sarah said. Give us a chance to address the Council's concerns. Give us time to prove we can adapt to your expectations. The time for discussion has passed, Vexthor said. We vote now. All in favor of expelling humanity from the Galactic Council and establishing a quarantine around human space. Cast your vote. Lights appeared above each delegation's seat. Green for yes, red for no. Sarah watched as green light after green light illuminated the chamber. The Vrelians voted yes. The Krell voted yes. The Thexians voted yes. 42 species representing billions of souls voted to cast humanity out. Only 5 voted no. The young Prixian civilization, barely more advanced than humans, voted to keep humanity. The Delthari, a warrior species that respected human military tactics, voted no. And 3 others, small voices in a large council, stood by humanity. The vote is decided, Vexthor announced. Humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council. All human diplomatic personnel must leave within 1 solar day. All trade agreements are void. All cultural exchanges are terminated. A defensive blockade will be established around human space using automated platforms. No human vessel may cross this boundary. No council vessel may enter human territory. This quarantine will remain in effect indefinitely. Sarah stood silently for a long moment. She felt the weight of humanity's disappointment, but she refused to show weakness. Finally, she spoke. This council was founded on the principle that all intelligent species deserve a voice in galactic affairs. Today, you have abandoned that principle out of fear. You fear our speed, our creativity, our refusal to simply accept that old ways are the only ways. She paused, looking at each delegation in turn. We came to the stars seeking friends. We found judges instead. We came offering partnership. We received rejection instead. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the crystal chamber. At the doorway, she turned back. You are making a mistake, not because humanity is perfect, but because isolation never makes anyone better. You could have guided us. You could have shared your wisdom while learning from our perspective. Instead, you chose to build walls. She took a deep breath. We will respect your decision. We will return to our space. We will leave you alone. But remember this day. Remember that you had a chance to embrace something different, and you chose fear instead. Then Ambassador Sarah Chen walked out of the Galactic Council for the last time. The news reached Earth within hours. Humanity's first contact with alien life had filled everyone with hope and wonder. Joining the Galactic Council had been celebrated as humanity's greatest achievement. Now, barely a human lifetime later, that dream was ending. The reaction on Earth was mixed. Some were angry, demanding that humanity fight back against this injustice. Others were relieved, happy to focus on human affairs without alien interference. Still others were simply sad, mourning the loss of what could have been. In the United Nations building in New York, the leaders of Earth's nations gathered. The Secretary General, an elderly woman named Dr. Amara Okafor, addressed the assembly. The Galactic Council has made their decision. We must now make ours. Do we rage against this exile? Do we plot revenge? Do we spend our energy trying to prove them wrong? She shook her head. No, we do something better. We learn, we grow, we build. They called us unstable, said the Chinese premier. They called us aggressive. They called us too different to coexist with. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps, Dr. Okafor agreed. Or perhaps they are wrong. Time will tell, but we will not waste our energy on bitterness. The galaxy has given us an opportunity, whether they realize it or not. They have given us time to develop without interference, without restrictions, without anyone telling us what we can or cannot research, build, or dream. The Russian president leaned forward. You're saying we should use this isolation to our advantage? I'm saying we should be ourselves, Dr. Okafor replied. The council feared our speed, our innovation, our chaos. They wanted us to slow down, to be more like them. Well, now we don't have to. Now we can be fully, completely, unapologetically human. In orbit around Earth, the last human ships returned from council space. They brought with them the final diplomats, the last traitors, the scientists who had been studying at alien universities. As they crossed back into human territory, they watched the barrier go up behind them. The automated defense platforms activated one by one, creating a sphere of controlled space around humanity's 200 worlds. The platforms were council technology, designed to keep humans in and everyone else out. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a city. There were thousands of them. Captain James Rodriguez watched from the bridge of his ship, the UNSS Magellan. They really did it. They locked us away like we're a disease. His first officer, a woman named Lieutenant Sarah Park, shook her head. They locked themselves away from us. There's a difference. How do you figure? They're afraid of change. They built this barrier not to protect themselves, but to protect their comfortable, predictable existence. Meanwhile, we're free. Free to experiment. Free to innovate. Free to become whatever we're capable of becoming. She smiled. I almost feel sorry for them. Rodriguez laughed. You think we'll be okay? 200 worlds against an entire galaxy? We've faced worse odds, Park said. We came from one planet. We survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and near extinction. We went from simple tools to splitting the atom in just a few thousand years. We went from first flight to walking on our moon in 66 years. She gestured at the stars beyond the viewport. The Council thinks they've contained us. They haven't. They've just given us room to grow. On Axiom Prime, the Council delegates celebrated. The disruptive element had been removed. The galaxy could return to its comfortable stability. Species could expand at reasonable rates. Trade could follow predictable patterns. Everything could go back to the way it had been for thousands of years. Vexthor stood in his private chambers looking out at the crystalline city below. His aide approached quietly. Leader Vexthor, the human ships have all crossed the boundary. The quarantine is complete. Good, Vexthor said, but he didn't feel good. He felt uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. Do you regret the decision, leader? No, Vexthor said firmly. Humanity was too dangerous to keep close. Their chaos would have infected the entire council eventually. We made the right choice. Then why do you look troubled? Vexthor was silent for a long moment. The human ambassador said something as she left. She said we were making a mistake. She said isolation never makes anyone better. He turned to face his aide. What if she was right? What if by pushing them away, we've ensured they'll develop without our guidance, without our wisdom to temper their aggression? They are contained, leader. The barrier will hold. Let them rage against it if they wish. Eventually, they will accept their fate. Yes, Vexthor agreed. I suppose you're right. But as he looked up at the stars, he wondered. Humans had surprised everyone by reaching space so quickly. They had surprised everyone by adapting to faster-than-light travel within a generation. They had surprised everyone with their rapid expansion and relentless innovation. What surprises might they have in store behind that barrier, where no one was watching? 50 light-years away on Earth, Dr. Okafor held a private meeting with humanity's top scientists and military leaders. We have a question to answer, she said. The Council expelled us because they found us dangerous and unpredictable. Should we try to change? Should we try to become more like them, hoping they'll accept us back someday? The room was silent for a moment. Then an old military general spoke up. No, we should become more of what we already are. Better humans. Stronger humans, smarter humans. And when the galaxy needs us someday, and they will, we'll be ready. Dr. Okafor smiled. Then let's get to work. 50 years had passed since the barrier went up. 50 years since humanity disappeared behind automated defense platforms and radio silence. For the Galactic Council, these had been 50 years of peace and prosperity. Ambassador Tillix, now much older and grayer, stood in the council chamber presenting his annual trade report. Economic growth continues at a steady 3% across all sectors. Trade routes are stable and profitable. There have been no significant market disruptions in 47 years. The Golden Age continues. There was satisfied applause from the assembled delegates. Vexthor, still the council leader after all these years, nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Ambassador. The removal of human volatility has indeed brought the stability we sought. The Arxelian delegate chimed musically. Cultural exchange programs report unprecedented cooperation between species. Art and science progress steadily. Philosophy and spirituality deepen across the galaxy. The Council has truly entered an age of enlightenment. A young Prixian delegate raised a tentacle hesitantly. Has there been any contact with humanity?
Any attempt to check on their status?
The chamber fell quiet. It was a question rarely asked anymore. In the early years after the exile, there had been debate about monitoring the humans. But as time passed and the barrier reported no breach attempts, humanity simply faded from galactic consciousness. Vexthor's expression darkened slightly. The quarantine remains in effect. The automated platforms report no attempts to cross the boundary. Long-range scans detect no transmissions from human space. As far as the galaxy is concerned, humanity has chosen to remain isolated. But shouldn't we at least check on them? The young Prixian pressed. To ensure they're surviving? To see if they've changed? An older delegate made a dismissive gesture. Let sleeping predators lie. Humanity was given their space. If they had wished to rejoin civilization, they would have reached out by now. Their silence speaks volumes. The Prixian delegate sat down unconvinced but unwilling to push further. The meeting moved on to other matters. Trade agreements, scientific collaborations, a new art exhibition featuring works from 15 different species. No one spoke about the humans again, but not everyone had forgotten. In a private research station orbiting a distant moon, a Krell scientist named Thinker of Deep Thoughts reviewed data that troubled his vast brain. The Krell were among the oldest species in the Council, their civilization spanning over 1 million years. They had seen species rise and fall, they had witnessed countless civilizations, and they knew one truth above all others. Silence was never just silence. Thinker of Deep Thoughts had been monitoring the human quarantine zone for decades, not out of nostalgia but out of scientific curiosity. In the first 10 years after the exile, he had detected exactly what he expected to detect. Increased traffic as humans consolidated their colonies, energy signatures from expanding infrastructure, the electromagnetic noise of a civilization going about its business. Then, about 30 years ago, something changed. The noise didn't decrease, it transformed. The energy signatures became strange. Readings that didn't match any known technology. Quantum fluctuations that shouldn't be possible, and most disturbing of all, entire stars in human space began behaving oddly. He brought his findings to the Council 5 years ago. They dismissed his concerns. Sensor errors, they said. False readings caused by the barrier itself, they claimed. The Krell see patterns where none exist, they joked. But Thinker of Deep Thoughts knew his instruments were working perfectly. Something unprecedented was happening behind that barrier, and the Council was choosing to ignore it because acknowledging it would mean admitting they might have made a mistake. He continued his observations in silence. On the other side of the galaxy, a Xanthari merchant named Crix was having a very bad day. His ship, the Prophet's Dream, had suffered a catastrophic navigation computer failure in the middle of a routine cargo run. Instead of arriving at his destination, he found himself drifting in an empty region of space. Emergency systems barely keeping life support online. His engineer, a competent but nervous young Xanthari named Pip, emerged from the engine room with bad news. The navigation core is completely fried. Must have been a power surge. We're dead in space until we replace it, and the nearest repair station is 3 weeks away even if we had working engines. Crix groaned. This trip was supposed to make us enough profit to retire. Now we'll be lucky if we don't starve before rescue arrives. Actually, boss, we have a bigger problem. Pip brought up a star chart on the emergency display. The random jump put us here. He pointed at their location. Crix's eyes widened in horror. They were less than 5 light years from the human quarantine zone. By the Prophet's name, Crix whispered. We need to get out of here now. With what engines? Pip asked helplessly. They spent 3 days drifting, hoping their distress beacon would attract a Council patrol ship. None came. This region of space was deliberately avoided. No one wanted to accidentally drift too close to the humans. On the 4th day, out of boredom and curiosity, Pip activated the ship's long-range sensors. Might as well see what the humans are up to, he said. Maybe they're all dead. That would explain the silence. Crix was about to tell him to save power, but his curiosity got the better of him. Fine, but just a quick scan. Pip activated the sensors and pointed them toward the nearest human-controlled star system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sensor display lit up like a festival celebration. What in the... Pip's voice trailed off. Crix stared at the readings in disbelief. That can't be right. Run a diagnostic. Pip ran 3 diagnostics. The sensors were working perfectly. The readings were real. The human star system wasn't just inhabited, it was transformed. The star itself was partially enclosed in what looked like massive orbital structures. Dyson swarm, Crix's mind supplied the term from ancient theoretical texts. The energy collection alone would power a civilization 1,000 times larger than any Council species. But it wasn't just one star. Pip panned the sensors to adjacent systems. Every single star in human space showed similar modifications. Ring worlds, orbital habitats so massive they made Council space stations look like toys. Structures that shouldn't be possible with known physics, boss. Pip's voice was shaking. What did the humans do? Crix couldn't answer. His mind was trying to process the implications. In 50 years, humanity had gone from 200 colonized worlds to this, a civilization that had harnessed the power of dozens of stars. Technology that made the council look primitive. We need to tell someone, Pip said. Who would believe us? Crix replied. The council dismissed a Krell scientist's findings. They'll dismiss 2 Xanthari merchants even faster. But this is important. The humans haven't been sleeping. They've been building something incredible. Crix was quiet for a long moment. Or something terrible, he finally said. The council exiled the humans because they feared human innovation and aggression. What have we created by leaving them alone for 50 years? Before Pip could answer, their distress beacon finally got a response. A council patrol ship arrived and towed them to safety. Crix filed a report about what they had seen, attaching all the sensor data. The report was marked as sensor malfunction and filed away. But Crix made copies. He sent them to Thinker of Deep Thoughts. He shared them quietly with other merchants who traveled near the quarantine zone. Rumors began to spread in the shadows of the council's golden age. The humans were building something. Something big. On Axiom Prime, Vexthor received a private message from an old friend, a Delthari warrior named General Krax. The Delthari had been one of the 5 species that voted against exiling humanity. They respected human military creativity, even if they found it unsettling. Vexthor, the message read, I don't know if you're receiving these warnings or if you're choosing to ignore them, but I've compiled reports from 17 different sources over the past 20 years. All of them suggest the same thing. Humanity is not quietly accepting their exile. They're preparing for something. I don't know if it's revenge, expansion, or something else entirely, but I know humans. They don't sit still. They never have. You should consider sending a diplomatic mission to check on them before it's too late. Vexthor deleted the message without responding. He had heard similar warnings before. He always came to the same conclusion. Humanity was contained. The barrier was strong, and even if humans had advanced their technology, what could 200 worlds do against a galactic civilization of thousands of species and millions of worlds? The council was safe. The peace would continue. There was nothing to fear. He almost believed it. In the council archives, buried deep in rarely accessed databases, reports continued to accumulate. Strange sensor readings, quantum anomalies, energy signatures that violated known physics, merchant ships reporting ghost readings near the quarantine zone, scientists noting unusual stellar behavior in human space. Each report was individually dismissed as error or coincidence. But together they painted a picture that should have terrified anyone paying attention. Humanity had gone silent not because they had given up, but because they were too busy to talk. They were building. They were learning. They were becoming something new. And no one in the council was watching. In his research station, Thinker of Deep Thoughts compiled his data into a comprehensive report. 5,000 pages of observations, calculations, and theoretical projections. He titled it The Human Question, A Critical Reassessment. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humanity has not been idle in exile. Based on observed technological progression, estimated energy outputs, and detected quantum signatures, I calculate that human civilization has advanced more in 50 years of isolation than the Council has advanced in the last 5,000 years. Whatever they are building behind that barrier, it represents either the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat in galactic history. We should have been watching. We should have been ready. I fear we are neither. He submitted the report to the Council. It was assigned to a committee for review. The committee scheduled a meeting for 6 months in the future. They saw no urgency. After all, humanity was locked away behind a barrier. What could possibly go wrong? On a small colony world at the edge of Council space, a young child named Xerix looked up at the stars with his teacher. The teacher pointed to a dark region of the sky where no stars seemed to shine. "What's there, teacher?" Xerix asked. "Nothing," the teacher replied. "Just empty space." But the teacher was wrong. Behind the automated platforms, behind the quantum barrier, behind 50 years of silence, humanity was very much present. And they were no longer the species the Council had exiled. They had become something more. In a small cafe on Axiom Prime, 3 off-duty Council analysts met for their weekly gathering. They were friends who had worked together for decades. comfortable enough to speak freely about things they would never say officially. "Do you ever wonder about the humans?" one asked. The others laughed nervously. "The council says not to waste time on dead questions," another replied. "But they're not dead, are they? They're just quiet. There's a difference." The third analyst leaned in close. "I accessed some old files last week. Reports from the early years after the exile. Humans colonized 200 worlds in 300 years. That's a new world every 18 months. That level of drive, that level of ambition, it doesn't just disappear." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that silence can mean a lot of things. It can mean surrender. It can mean extinction. Or it can mean someone is too busy working to bother talking." They sat in uncomfortable silence, each contemplating the implications. Finally, one of them spoke. "Even if you're right, what could they possibly do that would threaten the council? We have thousands of species, millions of worlds, technology that's been refined over 50,000 years." "I don't know," the analyst admitted. "But I know that underestimating humans is what got us into this situation in the first place. We underestimated how fast they would expand. We underestimated how quickly they would adapt. We underestimated their stubborn refusal to follow anyone else's rules." "You think we should be worried?" The analyst looked up at the crystal ceiling, as if trying to see through it to the stars beyond. "I think we're about to find out what happens when you lock a creative, aggressive, innovative species away from all supervision and tell them they're too dangerous for civilized society. What do you think happens?" "They either prove you right," the analyst said quietly, "or they prove you very, very wrong." None of them knew how soon they would get their answer. The golden age of the Galactic Council was about to end, not with a whimper, but with the arrival of something the galaxy had never seen before, something that would make humanity's exile seem like the worst mistake in galactic history. But that was still to come. For now, the Council celebrated their peace, their prosperity, and their wisdom. And behind the barrier, in the silence that terrified those few who were paying attention, humanity continued their work, preparing for the future. The first sign that something was wrong came from the Outer Rim. A Vrelian colony called Harmony's Rest simply stopped transmitting. At first, the Council assumed it was a communications failure. Technical problems happened, even in the golden age of galactic peace. They sent a repair ship. It never reported back. They sent a second ship, this time with a military escort. The escort transmitted for 3 hours, sending routine status updates. Then, mid-sentence, the transmission cut off. The last image received showed something massive on the sensors, something that was approaching fast. Then nothing. Vexthor convened an emergency council session. "We have lost contact with Harmony's Rest and 2 investigation teams. The Vrelian government is requesting immediate military support." "What could cause such complete communication blackout?" asked the Arxelian delegate, its musical tones strained with worry. Before anyone could answer, a priority alert flashed across every display in the chamber. Another colony had gone silent. This one was 3 systems away from Harmony's Rest. Then another alert. Then another. Within 6 hours, 5 entire colonies had vanished from the Council's network. Millions of souls gone without a trace. "This must be some kind of coordinated attack," said Ambassador Tillix, his gray fur standing on end with fear. "But by whom? We've been at peace for 50 years. We have no enemies." The Council deployed their defensive fleets, battleships that had patrolled the galaxy for centuries, maintaining peace through the simple presence of overwhelming force. They arrived at Harmony's Rest expecting to find raiders, pirates, or perhaps a rogue AI that had gone mad. What they found was horror beyond imagination. The planet was still there. The buildings still stood. The ships were still in orbit. But there was no life. Not a single living thing remained. Everything organic had been stripped away, leaving behind empty cities and silent machines. It was as if something had reached down and carefully extracted every living cell from an entire world. Admiral Thress, a veteran Krell warrior whose brain had commanded fleets for 800 years, transmitted his findings back to the Council. His telepathic message was tight with controlled panic. This was not natural. This was not raiders. Something consumed all biological matter on this world, consumed it completely, leaving no trace. "I have never seen anything like this in my entire life." "Could it be a plague?" someone suggested hopefully. "A plague could be contained, cured, fought with medicine and science." "No," Admiral Thress replied. Plagues leave bodies. This leaves nothing but empty shells where life used to be. The council scrambled to understand what they were facing. Scientists analyzed every bit of data from the dead worlds. They found traces of technology that didn't match any known civilization. Residual energy signatures that suggested something massive had been present. Strange chemical markers that indicated biological matter had been broken down at a molecular level and absorbed. Then the second wave hit. This time, the invaders didn't arrive in silence. They announced themselves with overwhelming force. A fleet emerged from deep space, ships the size of planets moving in perfect coordination. They weren't made of metal and circuits like council ships. They were organic, living things, but also machines. Technology and biology merged into something nightmarish. The council fleet engaged them at the Battle of Nexus Point. 50,000 warships, the pride of galactic civilization, against roughly 300 enemy vessels. The battle lasted 17 minutes. The council ships threw everything they had at the invaders. Plasma torpedoes that could crack a moon in half. Antimatter missiles that could vaporize cities. Energy beams that could cut through any known armor. The enemy ships absorbed it all. They didn't dodge or defend. They simply took the hits and kept coming, healing any damage faster than it could be inflicted. Then they fired back. The weapons they used didn't just destroy ships. They unmade them. Reality itself seemed to unravel where their beams touched council vessels. Ships didn't explode. They simply stopped existing, erased from space-time as if they had never been there. Admiral Thress survived only because he ordered a retreat the moment he realized conventional weapons were useless. He escaped with less than 1,000 ships from a fleet of 50,000. His report to the council was brief and devastating. We cannot fight them. Every tactic we know, every weapon we possess is useless. They adapt to our attacks within minutes. They are predators and we are prey. The council chamber erupted in panic. Delegates shouted over each other, demanding solutions, assigning blame, calling for emergency measures. Vexthor tried to maintain order, but even his commanding presence couldn't calm the growing hysteria. Then one of the Krell delegates transmitted a piece of information that made the entire chamber fall silent. We have identified the enemy. They are called the Devourers. They are mentioned in our oldest archives, records that date back over 1 million years. They are a swarm intelligence that has consumed 17 galaxies. They do not negotiate. They do not communicate. They simply arrive, consume all biological and technological matter, and move on. They are extinction made manifest. How do we stop them? Vexthor demanded. According to our records, no one ever has. Species that encounter the Devourers have 3 choices: flee, hide, or die. The few that survived did so by running to other galaxies and hoping the swarm would never find them. That's impossible, said the Arxelian delegate. We have 50,000 years of accumulated knowledge. Surely somewhere in all that wisdom there's an answer. The Devourers have consumed civilizations far older and more advanced than ours. The Krell replied. Age and wisdom mean nothing to them. They have faced every possible defense, every possible weapon. They have adapted to it all. The next 3 weeks were a nightmare. The Devourers swept through council space like a tide of death. World after world fell silent. Species that had existed for millions of years were wiped out in days. The council fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, was reduced to scattered groups of refugees running from an enemy they couldn't fight. The death toll was incomprehensible. 3 entire species went extinct. Billions died. Hundreds of worlds were rendered lifeless. The council tried everything. They sent suicide ships loaded with antimatter into the enemy fleet. The Devourers absorbed the explosions and grew stronger. They tried biological weapons, hoping to poison the organic components. The Devourers adapted to the toxins within hours and began using them as fuel. They tried hacking into the enemy's network, hoping to disrupt their coordination. The Devourers' hive mind was so vast and complex that the Council's best AI specialists went mad trying to comprehend it. Nothing worked. Nothing even slowed them down. In a bunker deep beneath Axiom Prime's surface, the surviving Council leadership gathered. Their crystal chamber was gone, destroyed in an attack that killed half the delegates. Now they huddled in a cold metal room, surrounded by security forces and wearing emergency atmosphere suits in case life support failed. Vexthor looked at the faces around him. These were the representatives of the galaxy's greatest civilizations, and they looked like frightened children. His own forearms trembled with exhaustion and fear. "We need options," he said, his voice hoarse from days of constant commands. "Anything." No matter how desperate, Ambassador Tillich spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "We could try to flee, gather as many ships as possible, evacuate who we can, and run to another galaxy. The calculations show we couldn't evacuate even 1% of our population," someone replied, "and the Devourers would likely follow us anyway." A young delegate from a species that had only joined the Council 50 years ago stood up. "What about the humans?" The room went dead silent. Every eye turned to the young delegate, who seemed to shrink under the weight of their stares. "What did you say?" Vexthor asked quietly. "The humans," the delegate repeated, voice shaking. "We exiled them 50 years ago. We locked them behind a barrier and forgot about them. But they're still there. Still alive, maybe. Maybe they could help." "The humans?" Ambassador Tillich laughed, a bitter sound without humor. "The species we exiled because they were too aggressive? Too unpredictable? You want to ask them for help? Do we have any other choice?" The young delegate asked. "Every species in this council has tried to stop the Devourers. We've used every weapon, every strategy, every bit of knowledge from 50,000 years of civilization, and we've failed. The humans, they think differently than we do. That's why we exiled them. Their chaos, their unpredictability, their refusal to follow established patterns. Maybe that's exactly what we need." An older delegate scoffed. "The humans have been silent for 50 years. They're probably dead, or they've regressed to primitive savagery, or they're sitting behind their barrier laughing at our suffering. We don't know what they've been doing," the young delegate countered. "But we know they're survivors. We know they're innovative. We know they don't give up. Isn't it worth at least asking?" Vexthor was silent, his mind racing through memories. He remembered Ambassador Sarah Chen's final words. "You are making a mistake. Not because humanity is perfect, but because isolation never makes anyone better. You could have guided us. You could have shared your wisdom while learning from our perspective. Instead, you chose fear." Had she been right? Had exiling humanity been the Council's greatest mistake? "The humans have no reason to help us," Vexthor said finally. "We judged them. We rejected them. We locked them away like criminals. Why would they come to our aid now?" "Because that's what humans do," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see General Krax, the Delthari warrior who had voted against exiling humanity. He had been commanding defensive forces on the front lines and had just arrived, his armor scorched from battle. "I've studied human history. I've read their literature. I've tried to understand their psychology. And one thing stands out above all else. Humans are at their best when facing impossible odds. They're at their strongest when defending those who cannot defend themselves. They have this ridiculous, illogical, beautiful concept they call standing up for what's right, even when it costs them everything. You really think they would help us after what we did to them?" Ambassador Tillich asked skeptically. "I think it's worth asking," General Krax replied, "because the alternative is extinction, and I would rather beg for help from a species I wronged than watch the entire galaxy die because I was too proud to admit I made a mistake." The Council debated for another hour, but the conclusion was inevitable. They were out of options. The Devourers were less than 3 weeks from Axiom Prime. In 3 weeks, the capital of galactic civilization would fall, and with it, any chance of organized resistance. Finally, Vexthor stood. "I will lead a delegation to the human quarantine zone. I will ask for their help. I will apologize for our actions 50 years ago. And I will hope that humanity is more forgiving than we were." "What if they refuse?" someone asked. Vexthor's expression was grim. "Then we die knowing we tried everything. But if they agree, if they come to our aid, then we owe them more than an apology. We owe them the truth that we were wrong. About everything." A ship was prepared, one of the fastest in the remaining fleet. Vexthor gathered his delegation. General Krax, thinker of deep thoughts, and surprisingly the old merchant Krix, who had been one of the first to see evidence of human advancement. As they prepared to depart, thinker of deep thoughts shared something that made everyone pause. "I have been monitoring human space for 50 years. The technology I have observed there is concerning." "Concerning how?" Vexthor asked. "Concerning in that it far exceeds anything the Council has achieved. Concerning in that I don't understand half of what I'm seeing. concerning in that humanity has done in 50 years what should take a civilization 10,000 years to accomplish. The ancient Krell pulsed with uncertainty. We are going to ask for help from a species that has become something we cannot comprehend. I do not know if that makes them our salvation or our doom. We'll find out soon enough, Vexthor said. The ship departed Axiom Prime, racing toward the human quarantine zone. Behind them, the Devourers continued their inexorable advance. Ahead of them lay a barrier that hadn't been crossed in 50 years, and beyond that barrier, a mystery. What had humanity become in their exile? And would they forgive the galaxy that cast them out? The journey to the human quarantine zone took 3 days. 3 days while the Devourers consumed 2 more worlds. 3 days while refugees fled in every direction, clogging space lanes with desperate ships. 3 days while the greatest civilization in galactic history crumbled. Vexthor spent those days preparing his speech. What could he possibly say to humanity? How could he ask for help after everything the Council had done? He wrote and rewrote his words, trying to find the right balance between humility and urgency. On the 3rd day, they reached the barrier. Thousands of automated defense platforms floated in perfect formation, creating a sphere of controlled space around humanity's territory. Each platform was armed with enough firepower to destroy a city. They had been placed there to keep humanity contained. Now, Vexthor hoped they would let him pass. Transmitting identification codes, said the ship's pilot, a young Prixian officer whose hands shook on the controls, requesting permission to enter human space. Emergency diplomatic mission. They waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. No response came from the platforms. No response came from beyond the barrier. Maybe no one's there, General Crack said quietly. Maybe they really are all dead. Then, without warning, the platform simply shut down. One by one, their lights went dark. Their weapons powered off. They drifted in space like dead metal sculptures. What just happened? The pilot asked, confused. They let us through, Vexthor said, feeling a chill run through his body. The humans have been watching us this whole time. They knew we were coming. The ship crossed the boundary into human space. Immediately, their sensors went crazy. Readings that made no sense. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist. Quantum anomalies that violated known physics. By all the stars, Crix whispered, staring at his merchant ship's sensors. The readings I saw 50 years ago were nothing compared to this. Thinker of deep thoughts pulsed with what might have been excitement or terror. Fascinating. The entire fabric of space-time in this region has been modified. They're not just using technology. They've rewritten the rules of physics itself. As they flew deeper into human territory, they began to see the truth of what humanity had built. Every star was surrounded by massive orbital structures, collecting energy with perfect efficiency. Dyson swarms that could power civilizations 1,000 times larger than any council species. But that was just the beginning. They saw ring worlds, massive structures that circled entire stars, providing living space for trillions. They saw habitats the size of moons, connected by transport networks that seemed to move ships faster than light, without using traditional jump drives. They saw asteroid belts that had been transformed into computational matrices, processing power beyond anything the Council had dreamed possible. This is impossible, the pilot said. How could they build all this in just 50 years? Because we left them alone, Vexthor said quietly. We gave them freedom from our rules, our regulations, our careful, slow progress. We gave them exactly what they needed, time and space to be completely unapologetically human. A transmission came through, the first communication from humanity in 50 years. A calm female voice spoke in perfect Council standard, the language used for diplomatic communication. Council vessel, you are cleared to proceed to Earth. Navigation data is being transmitted to your ship. Welcome to the solar system. The pilot looked at Vexthor, who nodded. They followed the transmitted coordinates, and soon Earth came into view. The homeworld of humanity was transformed. The planet itself was still there, still blue and green and beautiful, but surrounding it was a network of orbital infrastructure so dense it looked like a second atmosphere, made of metal and light. Space stations the size of continents, shipyards that could build vessels as large as moons, defense platforms that made the old quarantine barrier look like children's toys, and ships. Thousands of ships, millions of ships. A fleet so vast that even counting them would take days. They could have broken through the barrier anytime they wanted, General Crack said in awe. 1% of this fleet could have smashed through those platforms like they were made of paper. But they didn't, Vexthor said. They respected our wishes. They stayed in their space even though they could have taken whatever they wanted. A docking station guided them in, and they found themselves in a bay large enough to hold 100 ships their size. As they disembarked, they were met by a human welcoming committee. The lead human was a man who looked to be in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. He wore a simple suit, nothing fancy or military. He smiled and extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome to Earth, I'm Prime Minister James Rodriguez. We've been expecting you." Vexthor hesitated, then carefully grasped the human's small hand with one of his four. "You knew we would come?" "We've been monitoring the Devourer invasion," Rodriguez said simply. "We knew the Council would eventually need help. Please come with me. We have much to discuss." They were led through corridors that seemed to shift and change, adapting to their needs. Gravity adjusted automatically for each species' comfort. The air composition changed to match their requirements. Everything was designed with a care and attention to detail that spoke of a civilization that had mastered the art of making others welcome. They entered a conference room with a view of Earth below. Rodriguez gestured for them to sit, and chairs materialized that perfectly fit each delegate's body shape. "Before we begin," Vexthor said, "I must offer an apology. 50 years ago, the Galactic Council made a terrible mistake. We judged humanity based on fear rather than understanding. We exiled you because you were different, because you challenged our comfortable certainty. We were wrong. I was wrong, and I am deeply sorry." Rodriguez smiled sadly. Apology accepted. "We were hurt by the exile, but we understood. The Council had maintained stability for 50,000 years. Then we came along, expanding fast, innovating constantly, refusing to slow down. We scared you. That's natural. You're being more gracious than we deserve," General Crack said. "We locked you away like criminals." "You gave us freedom," Rodriguez corrected. "Freedom to research without restrictions. Freedom to build without regulations. Freedom to become what we were always meant to be. In a way, the exile was the best thing that could have happened to us." Thinker of deep thoughts pulsed with curiosity. "What exactly have you become?" "The technology I've observed violates everything we know about physics and engineering." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "You want the truth? All of it?" "Please," Vexthor said. Rodriguez took a deep breath. 200 years ago, before humanity joined the Galactic Council, we had a visitor. A Devourer scout ship arrived in our solar system. We barely survived the encounter. It destroyed Mars' colony, killed 3 million people, and nearly cracked Earth's moon in half. But we fought back with everything we had, and through luck and desperation we managed to damage it enough that it retreated. "You fought the Devourers before?" General Crax leaned forward. "When?" "Long before we had faster-than-light travel. Long before we met the Council. We were just starting to colonize our own solar system when they found us." Rodriguez's expression grew distant. "That scout ship changed everything. We studied the wreckage it left behind. We analyzed its technology. We learned that somewhere out in the universe there was a threat that could wipe out all life, and we dedicated ourselves to being ready when it returned." "So when you joined the Council," Vexthor began. "We were already preparing," Rodriguez confirmed. "We expanded quickly because we needed territory, resources, industrial capacity. We developed aggressive military tactics because we knew we'd need them. We asked endless questions because we were searching for any knowledge that might help us survive. And when we exiled you," Vexthor asked quietly, "we saw it as an opportunity. The Council's regulations restricted research into dangerous technologies. Your ethics boards moved slowly, carefully, ensuring every innovation was safe before implementation. We understood your caution, but we didn't have time for it. The Devourers were coming. We knew it in our bones. So when you locked us behind that barrier, we got to work." Rodriguez stood and walked to the window. "We built the Dyson swarms to power our research. We constructed quantum computational networks to process data faster than any biological brain. We experimented with technologies the Council would have banned as too dangerous. We pushed the boundaries of physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. We made breakthroughs in 50 years that should have taken thousands. But why?" Crix asked. "Why work so hard to save a galaxy that rejected you?" Rodriguez turned to face them. "Because that's what humans do. We don't abandon people, even people who wronged us. We don't let innocent species die because their leaders made mistakes. We stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, even when it costs us everything. He smiled. The Council called us chaotic and unpredictable, but our chaos comes from empathy, from refusing to accept that bad things are inevitable. You wanted us to be calm and logical and cold, but our passion, our emotion, our stubborn refusal to give up, that's what makes us human. That's what makes us strong. Vexthor felt something break inside him. Pride, maybe? Or the last remnants of the certainty he had carried for so long. You're right. About all of it. We tried to change you because we couldn't understand you. We feared your differences instead of learning from them. The Council has been the dominant power in the galaxy for 50,000 years, Thinker of Deep Thought said. In that time, we've refined our ways, optimized our systems, created perfect stability. But we stopped growing. We stopped adapting. We became so comfortable in our perfection that we forgot how to change. Meanwhile, humanity spent 50 years doing nothing but change, Rodriguez said. And now the Devourers are here, and the galaxy needs someone who knows how to adapt, who knows how to fight against impossible odds, who's too stubborn to accept defeat. Will you help us? Vexthor asked. I know we don't deserve it. I know we have no right to ask. But billions of innocents are dying. Species that had nothing to do with your exile are being wiped out. If there's any mercy in humanity, any forgiveness, we're begging for it now. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, we'll help. Not because you deserve it. Not because you apologized, but because it's the right thing to do. Because every living being in this galaxy deserves a chance to exist, to grow, to reach for the stars. The Devourers represent everything we oppose. Extinction, hopelessness, the end of all possibility. So yes, we'll fight. We'll give everything we have to stop them. Relief flooded through Vexthor so powerfully that his legs nearly gave out. Thank you. Thank you. But we have conditions, Rodriguez continued. When this is over, the Council needs to change. No more exiling species because they're different. No more assuming old ways are the only ways. No more fear of innovation and chaos. The galaxy needs to grow up and learn that diversity isn't a threat, it's a strength. Agreed, Vexthor said immediately. Anything you want. We'll reform the entire Council structure. We'll want that in writing, Rodriguez said with a slight smile. Humans have learned not to trust verbal promises from the Council. Despite everything, Vexthor found himself smiling back. Fair enough. Rodriguez activated a holographic display. Now let's talk strategy. The Devourers are currently 3 weeks from Axiom Prime. The Council fleet has been reduced to scattered remnants. Civilian evacuations are underway, but insufficient. Traditional weapons and tactics have proven useless. Did I miss anything? That about sums it up, General Crack said grimly. Good. Then let me tell you how we're going to win. Rodriguez's expression became fierce, and for the first time, Vexthor saw the warrior that lurked beneath the diplomat's calm exterior. The Devourers have consumed 17 galaxies. They think they've seen everything, fought every possible enemy, adapted to every threat. They're wrong. They've never fought humanity. They've never faced an enemy that turns weakness into strength, that sees impossible odds and says, watch me anyway. They're about to learn that some species don't know when to quit. Over the next hours, Rodriguez explained humanity's plan. It was audacious, brilliant, and completely insane. It involved weapons that attacked the Devourers' hive mind directly, tactics that exploited their greatest strength as a weakness, and strategies that seemed impossible but might just work. As Vexthor listened, he realized something profound. The Council had exiled humanity because they were different, because they didn't fit the mold of civilized behavior. But that difference, that chaos, that unpredictable creativity, was exactly what the galaxy needed. Humanity hadn't become more like the Council during their exile. They had become more themselves, and that would make all the difference. The human fleet assembled at the edge of their territory, 50,000 ships, each one incorporating technology that seemed like magic to the Council observers. Ships that could fold space around them, moving without traditional engines. Ships that generated their own gravity wells, pulling enemy vessels out of position. Ships with weapons that could target not just physical matter, but the quantum connections that held the Devourer swarm together. Admiral Jennifer Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship, indomitable spirit. She was Sarah Chen's granddaughter, carrying her grandmother's determination and her grandfather's tactical brilliance. She looked at the holographic display showing the Devourer fleet approaching Axiom Prime. 2 weeks until they reached the capital, her tactical officer reported. Council evacuations are 40% complete. Then we'd better buy them more time, Admiral Chen said. All ships prepare for quantum fold. We're taking the fight to them. On Axiom Prime, Vexthor watched the evacuation efforts with a heavy heart. Millions were fleeing the planet, but millions more remained. There wasn't enough time. There had never been enough time. Then his communication device activated. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen. Council Leader Vexthor, this is Admiral Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. We're about to engage the Devourers. I wanted you to know, whatever happens today, humanity doesn't blame your people for the exile. We understand fear. We've felt it ourselves. But we're also here to show you what humanity learned in 50 years of isolation. That fear is conquered by action. That impossible is just another word for difficult, and that sometimes the universe needs someone crazy enough to stand up and say no. Admiral, Vexthor said, his voice thick with emotion, your grandmother was right. We made a terrible mistake exiling your people. Thank you for being better than we were. Admiral Chen smiled. See you when this is over, Council Leader. Humanity's coming home. The transmission ended, and Vexthor watched as the human fleet appeared on long-range sensors near the Devourer swarm. What happened next would determine the fate of the galaxy. The Devourers detected the human fleet immediately. Their response was what it had always been: overwhelming force. Planet-sized bioships turned their weapons on the newcomers, firing beams that unraveled matter at the quantum level. The same weapons that had destroyed Council fleets in minutes. The human ships didn't dodge. They didn't run. They activated defensive systems that folded space around them, and the Devourer weapons simply missed, targeting locations where the human ships appeared to be but weren't actually present. Weapons free, Admiral Chen ordered. Begin protocol discordance. The human ships fired, but they weren't using traditional weapons. Instead, they transmitted something directly into the Devourer hive mind. A virus, but not a digital one. A conceptual virus. The idea of individuality. The concept of self. The notion that each part of the swarm was separate, distinct, capable of independent thought. The Devourers had consumed 17 galaxies because of their perfect unity. Every ship, every creature, every cell thinking as one. It was their greatest strength. But it was also a vulnerability that no one had ever thought to exploit, until humanity. The effect was immediate and devastating. Devourer ships began behaving erratically. Some stopped responding to swarm commands. Others turned on their neighbors, confused about which vessels were allies and which were threats. The perfect coordination that had made them unstoppable began to fracture. Hive mind cohesion dropping, the tactical officer reported. They're fighting themselves. But the Devourers were adaptable. They had survived for eons by learning from every attack. Already their hive mind was compensating, rebuilding its unity, creating new neural pathways to bypass the disruption. They're adapting, Admiral Chen observed. Just like we expected. Phase 2. The human ships changed tactics. Now they deployed psychological warfare on a scale never seen before. They transmitted images, sounds, and concepts designed to confuse and disorient the swarm. Human art, human music, human philosophy. The chaotic, contradictory, beautiful mess of human culture, all compressed into a data stream and fired directly into the Devourer consciousness. The swarm had encountered countless species, absorbed their knowledge, adapted to their attacks. But they had never encountered anything like humanity's chaos. Species that created art for the sake of beauty, music that existed only to evoke emotion, philosophy that questioned everything, including itself. Stories that celebrated individuals who defied impossible odds. The Devourers tried to process it all, to categorize and understand. But human culture didn't follow logical patterns. It was contradictory and emotional and sometimes deliberately absurd. The swarm's analytical processes became overloaded trying to make sense of it. More Devourer ships began to malfunction. Some simply stopped, paralyzed by existential confusion. Others broke from the swarm entirely, suddenly aware of themselves as individual entities and terrified by that awareness. It's working, the tactical officer said with barely controlled excitement. The swarm is fragmenting. Don't celebrate yet, Admiral Chen warned. They've survived this long because they're survivors. They'll find a way to adapt, she was right. The Devourers began to section off parts of their hive mind, isolating the infected portions like a body-fighting disease. They were learning to ignore the psychological attacks, to filter out the conceptual viruses. Time for Phase 3, Admiral Chen said quietly. Bring in the Prometheus fleet. A new group of human ships entered the battle. These weren't warships. They were slower, less armed, seemingly vulnerable. The Devourers focused on them immediately, sensing weakness. But these ships weren't weak. They were carriers. And what they carried was humanity's most dangerous weapon: themselves. Thousands of small pods launched from the Prometheus ships. Each pod contained a human volunteer, linked to an advanced AI system. They flew directly into the heart of the Devourer swarm, not to attack but to communicate. The Devourers tried to consume them, to absorb their biological matter. But as they did, something unexpected happened. The human volunteer's consciousness, backed by quantum technology, resisted absorption. Instead of being consumed, they began to spread throughout the swarm, introducing human thought patterns directly into the Devourer hive mind. It was the most dangerous mission humanity had ever conceived. Volunteers sacrificing themselves to become part of the enemy, to change it from within. Most would die. Many would be lost forever in the alien consciousness, but some just enough would succeed in planting the seed of doubt, of individuality, of the very chaos that made humanity unique. On Axiom Prime, Vexthor watched the battle unfold with a mixture of horror and awe. They're sacrificing themselves, willingly flying into certain death. That's humanity, General Crack said quietly. They don't just fight for survival, they fight for meaning, for each other. For strangers on distant worlds they've never met. We called it chaos. We were wrong. It's something far more powerful. It's purpose. In the depths of the Devourer swarm, something unprecedented was happening. The hive mind that had existed for millions of years, that had consumed countless civilizations, was experiencing something it had never felt before: doubt. Individual Devourer units began to question the swarm. Why did they consume? What was the purpose? Was there another way? The questions spread like wildfire, each infected unit contaminating others, the doubt growing exponentially. The swarm tried to purge the infection, to destroy the questioning units. But doing so only created more questions. Why destroy part of yourself? Doesn't that mean the parts are separate? Aren't we all individuals pretending to be one? The philosophical crisis cascaded through the entire swarm. Millions of years of certainty crumbled in hours. The Devourer fleet stopped advancing. Ships hung motionless in space as the consciousness that controlled them grappled with concepts it had never considered. Admiral Chen watched the readings with satisfaction. The swarm is fragmenting into smaller hive minds. Some are choosing to flee. Others are trying to maintain unity. A few are actually attempting to communicate. Can they be saved? Someone asked. That's not our decision to make, Admiral Chen replied. We've given them individuality. What they do with it is up to them. But they're no longer a unified threat. The invasion is broken. The Battle of the Outer Rim, as it would later be called, lasted 17 hours. By the end, the Devourer swarm had shattered into thousands of smaller groups. Many fled back to deep space. Some simply shut down, overwhelmed by their new awareness of self. A few, incredibly, began trying to communicate with human ships, seeking guidance on how to exist as individuals rather than as a collective. The galaxy was saved, but at a cost. 2,000 human volunteers had been lost in the consciousness assault. Millions more across the galaxy had died before humanity could intervene. 33 species had gone extinct. The scars would last for generations. But life would continue. That was what mattered. 6 months later, on a rebuilt Axiom Prime, the Galactic Council held its first reformed session. The crystal chamber had been restored, but the council itself was fundamentally different. Humanity sat at the table not as guests or outcasts, but as full members with a voice equal to any other species. But more importantly, the council's entire structure had been reformed. No longer would decisions be made by tradition and seniority alone. Individual rights were now protected. Innovation was encouraged rather than feared. Diversity was celebrated as a strength. Ambassador Marcus Webb, Sarah Chen's successor, stood to address the council. He was a younger man with the same determined look his predecessor had carried. 50 years ago, my predecessor stood in this chamber and was told humanity was too chaotic, too unpredictable, too dangerous for civilized society. You cast us out because we scared you, because we wouldn't slow down, Because we insisted on being different. The chamber was silent. No one interrupted. Today I stand before you again and I want to thank you. That caused surprised murmurs. Marcus smiled. Thank you for exiling us. Thank you for giving us the freedom to become what we needed to be. Thank you for teaching us that acceptance from others is less important than accepting ourselves. You thought you were punishing us. Instead, you gave us the greatest gift possible, the time and space to grow. He paused, looking around the chamber. But I also want to warn you, not as a threat but as a friend. The universe is vast and dangerous. The Devourers were just one threat among countless others. The next crisis might be something completely different, something none of us can predict. And when it comes, survival won't depend on stability or tradition or comfort. It will depend on our ability to adapt, to innovate, to embrace change even when it scares us. Marcus gestured to the human delegation and then to the other species. Humanity isn't special. We're not inherently better than anyone here, but we're different, and that difference matters. The galaxy needs all of us with all our unique perspectives working together, not trying to make each other the same, but celebrating what makes us different. Vexthor stood, his forearms spread in a gesture of respect. Ambassador Webb, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to formally apologize for the exile of 50 years ago. We were wrong. About humanity. About the value of diversity. About what it means to be civilized. He bowed, something a council leader had never done before. We are honored to have humanity back, not as subordinates but as equals. As teachers, as friends. The council chamber erupted in applause. Every species present stood in acknowledgement of humanity's return. After the official session ended, Vexthor approached Marcus privately. There's something I need to ask. Something that's been bothering me since your fleet arrived to save us. Go ahead, Marcus said. You knew the Devourers would come. You'd been preparing for 50 years. The timing was almost too perfect. Vexthor looked at Marcus carefully. Did you know? When we exiled you, did humanity somehow know this would happen? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled enigmatically. Humans have a saying, Council Leader. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We hoped we were wrong about the Devourers returning. We hoped the galaxy would be peaceful forever. But we prepared for the alternative. And when the worst came, we were ready. That doesn't really answer my question, Vexthor said. No, Marcus agreed. It doesn't. But sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. The question you should be asking yourself is this. What else is humanity preparing for that we're not talking about? What other threats are we watching for? What other innovations are we developing? Vexthor felt a chill. Should the council be worried? No, Marcus said simply. Because we're on the same side now. Humanity has no interest in conquering or controlling anyone. We just want to ensure that the next time something threatens life in this galaxy, we're all ready to face it together. He extended his hand. Partners? Vexthor grasped the small human hand with genuine warmth. Partners! As Marcus walked away, Vexthor found himself smiling. 50 years ago, he had helped exile humanity because they scared him. They still scared him a little. But now it was a good kind of fear. The kind that came from knowing your ally was strong, capable, and maybe just a little bit unpredictable. In a small cafe on Earth, an elderly woman sat watching the news coverage of humanity's triumphant return to the Galactic Council. Ambassador Sarah Chen, now retired and living quietly, smiled as she watched Marcus speak for humanity with the same passion she once had. Her granddaughter, Admiral Jennifer Chen, sat beside her. We did it, Grandma. We're back. Sarah shook her head gently. You did it. Your generation. I just planted the seeds. You told them they were making a mistake, Jennifer said. You were right. I was angry, Sarah corrected, and hurt, and scared that humanity would be isolated forever. But in the end, the exile was the best thing that could have happened. It forced us to be self-reliant. It gave us the freedom to innovate without restrictions. It made us strong. Do you think the council has really changed? Jennifer asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars visible through the cafe window. I think they're trying. I think nearly going extinct scared them enough to question their assumptions. Whether the change lasts, whether they truly embrace diversity and innovation, that depends on us. We have to keep pushing, keep questioning, keep refusing to accept that the old ways are the only ways. That sounds exhausting, Jennifer said with a laugh. It is, Sarah agreed. But that's what humanity does best. We don't give up. We don't settle for good enough. We keep reaching for better, even when better seems impossible. She reached over and squeezed her granddaughter's hand. The galaxy cast us out and then begged us to come back. Now it's our job to make sure that when the next crisis comes, and it will come, we're all ready to face it together. Think there'll be another crisis? Jennifer asked. Sarah smiled. There's always another crisis. But there's also always another chance to prove that working together, despite our differences, we can overcome anything. That's the real lesson the galaxy needed to learn. And thanks to the Devourers, they finally did. Up in orbit, the human fleet remained at high alert. They had saved the galaxy, but they were already preparing for the next threat. Research continued on new technologies. Training exercises pushed crews to their limits. Quantum sensors swept the void, watching for dangers the Council couldn't yet imagine. Humanity had been cast out and had returned stronger. They had been called chaotic and had turned that chaos into salvation. They had been feared and had proven that fear was warranted, but not for the reasons anyone expected. The galaxy had tried to contain humanity. Instead, they had unleashed them. And now, whether the galaxy was ready or not, humanity was back. Not as subordinates, not as outcasts, but as equals, partners, and protectors. The golden age of the Galactic Council had ended in fire and death. But from those ashes, something new was being born. A galactic civilization that valued diversity over conformity, innovation over tradition, and courage over comfort. It wouldn't be easy. There would be conflicts, disagreements, mistakes. But for the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy was truly alive with possibility. And at the heart of that possibility was a small, chaotic, stubborn species that refused to give up. Humanity had come home, and they were here to stay.